I didn't expect to come and hear one of my favorite hymns, the last one, Be Thou My Vision, so that was a pleasant surprise. Greetings from Steinbach, and especially so since this month you'll be seeing some people from Steinbach. For those of you who don't know me, or maybe you've seen my face either on a screen or in the pulpit a couple of times, I do work for the conference, and so I help sometimes make a preaching schedule. And this month, you guys get a lot of Steinbach, so I'll be here twice. And Neil Wiebe, one of our deacons from Steinbach, he'll also be here once. And whenever he saw that, then he said, "Hey, we should do a series." And I said, "Okay." And so there's a group of books in the Bible called Wisdom Literature, or wisdom and poetry tradition, and typically it's Proverbs, Job, and Ecclesiastes. And I said, "Let's do that." And he's like, "Okay." He's like, "We're going to need more than a month." And I said, "Nope, you get to do Ecclesiastes in one day." He wasn't very pleased with me. But I'll do Proverbs today, and then he'll do Ecclesiastes, and then I'll try to do Job in one day. And if you think that's a tall order, you're right, but I'll do my best. And I'm sure Neil will too. He does ask that you guys read through Ecclesiastes before he comes, and he says, "Get ready, bring snacks." He says it'll be 2 hours. Our text today will be from Proverbs 9, chapter 9, but I just want to zoom out a little bit and get a bird's eye view of Proverbs. And so I think most of us are familiar with how one of the first verses in Proverbs, how it starts. The verses 1 through 7 give us the introduction and tell us the purpose of the book. And then in verse 7 we have this famous verse. "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction." And then after this verse 1, chapter 1, verse 8. I'm just on the wrong side of Proverbs here. Chapter 1, verse 8 starts like this. "Hear, my son, your father's instruction." And if you're there in chapter 1, then flip over to chapter 2 and read the first verse in chapter 2, and it says, "My son, if you receive my words." And then if you flip over to chapter 3, "My son, do not forget my teaching." And then if you flip over to chapter 4, 5, 6, and 7, it's my son, hear, O son, my son, be attentive to my wisdom. Each chapter begins as a speech made to a son. And I like to think of it as a sort of, whenever kids graduate high school, and sometimes they bring in a speaker and they address them as they go out into the world. And I kind of see these speeches kind of like that. Hey, you're about to go out into the world, and I'd like to pass something on to you before you go. He urges them to listen to their father's and their mother's instruction. He urges them to choose wisdom and to turn away from evil. And this is all the way up to through chapter 7, but in chapter 8, the speaker changes. At first, it's a parent advocating wisdom, but now it's wisdom herself giving a speech. And actually, wisdom's already spoken in chapter 1, in the last half of chapter 1, and warns the people of the catastrophe that happens to those that ignore her. But in chapter 8, she speaks up again, and now she's telling of all the benefits she brings and of her part in the divine order. And then we get to chapter 9, and the speeches stop altogether, and instead we're given a little bit of a parable. 2 women are presented. Lady Wisdom in verses 1 through 6, and Woman Folly in 13 through 18. And then in between them are some very important but odd verses separating them. And I think The method that chapter 9 uses is worth noting because it's going to get used in the rest of the book of Proverbs. If you see how chapter 9 works, then it'll help you understand the rest of the book, how to read the rest of the book. And so what Proverbs chapter 9 is going to do is it's going to set two women side by side, and without asking, it's going to ask the reader to compare them and to contrast them. And this is basically what the rest of Proverbs does. For the most of the rest of the book, it sets, you're going to find individual verses divided into two parts. They'll have a saying and then another saying. It either reinforces what's already been said or it gives the opposite statement. And so for an example, Proverbs 21:14 says, "A gift in secret averts anger, and a concealed bribe, strong wrath." And so here, you don't see two opposites, you see two similar statements. And they seem to be saying the same thing. And so if you were to just read that, what would you think? Okay, we should use bribes and gifts to get out of trouble, right? Courtney, you were just down south, and my parents live down south too, and sometimes the way to get out of a ticket is, you hand your drivers and your information over, but there's a little something extra tucked underneath, and suddenly you're good to go. Is that what this verse is telling us to do? I think if we look closely, we see that there's differences between the two lines. One's a gift, one's called a gift, and most of us see gifts as positive things, and then the other one's a bribe. And most of us would probably say bribes are not positive things. And then we see strong wrath versus anger. Anger's, it's one thing, but strong wrath, that's a whole different level. So is it telling us to bribe people? And I think what it's saying is, be careful when you're accepting a gift. Know why you're accepting a gift. Know why the person is giving you the gift. And so, in receiving and in giving gifts, we need wisdom. And that's the theme of Proverbs. In whatever you do in life, you are going to need wisdom. And this is how most of Proverbs works after chapter 9. Or after chapter 8, it gives us two different pictures. We compare them or we contrast them to try to get a deeper understanding. We see how it started, and then we look, how does it go? Does it reinforce or does it contrast? And these are things that you have to sit and you have to think about for a little bit, because on its surface, it just sounds simple, right? And that's what Jesus did with his parables. Some people, they heard his stories and they're like, oh, it's a simple story. And they walked away. And Proverbs is doing the same thing. It's giving us a story and asking us to pay attention, to ask questions. So, in chapter 9, I've already said, Lady Wisdom in verses 1 through 6, and Woman Folly is in verses 13 through 18. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at Lady Wisdom for the first 3 verses, and then we're going to look at Woman Folly for 3 verses. We'll compare and we'll contrast them, and then we'll look at Lady Wisdom for another 3 verses, and Woman Folly for another 3 verses, and compare and contrast them. And then we'll move on to the middle of the chapter. So the first Lady Wisdom, it says here, chapter 9, verse 1, "Wisdom has built her house. She has hewn her 7 pillars. She has slaughtered her beasts. She has mixed her wine. She has also set her table. She has sent out her young woman to call from the highest places in town." That's Lady Wisdom. Now let's move over to verse 13. We're going to switch to Woman Folly. Verse 13. "The woman Folly is loud. She is seductive and knows nothing. She sits at the door of her house. She takes a seat on the highest places of the town, calling to those who pass by, calling to those who are going straight on their way." And so, using the method that Proverbs is asking us to use, what are the similarities between them? And I think the first one is probably the most obvious, is they're both women. And we should be expecting that if we've been reading through Proverbs. Wisdom, when wisdom is shown in the book as a person, it's shown as a woman. Even in the last chapter of Proverbs, we meet wisdom again, and it's in the form of two women, a mother and a wife. And both are characterized as wives. So why women? Why are women considered to be the picture of wisdom? And I think probably most women here are thinking it should be pretty obvious. And I say fair enough, but we have two women in this chapter. Why women for describing wisdom and folly? And I think one of the clues for this is the first verse of every chapter leading up to chapter 9. A father addressing a young man. A parent addressing a young child. A young adult child. I think several parts of Proverbs, if you've ever read through it, you know that it says that wisdom is better than any type of wealth, whether it's gold or jewels. It's better than any type of wealth that you can think of. And I think we've probably grown up comparatively wealthy compared to other places in the world. And probably due to our parents' hard work. And so money is something that may not mean so much to us. But something that is guaranteed to mean something to a young man is finding a potential spouse. It's universally important. Who am I going to marry? Who's going to be my partner in life? I think every young person, woman or a young man, think about this. Consider this. And not everybody gets married, but it is an experience that each one of us goes through. Nothing quite affects our lives as greatly as our spouse, whether for better or for worse. And I think for those of us who love our spouse, we would say we wouldn't trade anything for our spouse, for our significant other. And so Proverbs uses the woman as a picture of wisdom. And in this way, it mirrors the inevitability of the decision between wisdom and folly. You have to make a choice. This is an experience that everyone goes through. You have to make a choice between wisdom and folly. And they use the woman to show the far-reaching effect on which one you choose, and the value of choosing correctly. To the young man in Proverbs, lady wisdom and woman folly, they both call out to him in equal measure, and one will make him more fully alive, and one will make him question his will to live. And so those are the ways that they're the same. How are they different? And we see right off the bat that wisdom is industrious. She isn't just given houses. She isn't just given a feast. She produces what she has. She's productive, hardworking. She's wealthy because of who she is. Wisdom possesses a quality that builds wealth. But as we turn to woman folly, we see that she actually has a house. So in this way, they're the same. But what is missing is the statement that she built it. And that should cause us to ask, okay, so she has a house, but she didn't build it. Where did she get it? And this is one thing, again, we need to go through Proverbs. We see the one line, and then we see the second one, and we ask, what's different? What's missing? The writer could have said that she didn't build her own house, but he didn't. And nowadays, we're flooded with information. Back then, writing down stuff, writing a scroll was reserved for the top educated people, and it was an expensive task. And so they were as brief as they could be. Why say something that isn't happening? Why not just leave it out? And so what's missing here is a description of woman folly building her house. But she does have a house to sit in front of us. And so we ask, where did she get it? Instead of preparing food, Lady Folly sits. She's not busy preparing food. So where does she get her food from? Everyone has to eat. And these are the differences in the absence that the writer of Proverbs hopes that we notice. It's a question he hopes we ask. Back to Lady Wisdom in verse 4. Whoever is simple, let him turn in here. She's speaking now. Lady Wisdom is saying, whoever is simple, let him turn in here. To him who lacks sense, she says, come, eat of my bread and drink of the wine I have mixed. Leave your simple ways and live. Walk in the way of insight. Lady Folly also speaks up in verse 16. Whoever is simple, let him turn in here. And to him who lacks sense, she says, stolen water is sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. But he, the young man listening, he does not know that the dead are there, and that her guests are in the depths of Sheol. Some translations say in the depths of hell. So we do what we did before. What are the similarities? And we see right away the words spoken by both of these women are identical to start off. Whoever is simple, let him turn in here. They both appeal to the simple, and I think we should realize that simplicity, we don't see simplicity as a good or bad state. It's a state of innocent youth, neutrality. But innocence always gives way eventually to either purity or corruption, just like youth gives way to age or death. Lady Wisdom and Woman Folly both proposition the young man, vie for his attention, and eventually his day of choice will have to come. And I really want to stress this. Remaining neutral is not an option. Later, Woman Folly is described as knowing nothing, being ignorant. You've heard the saying, ignorance is bliss. But if you choose ignorance, you're already made your choice of which one you want. They are different, though. They both proposition the simple, but their offers are vastly different, both in content and what happens after. Lady Wisdom offers her own food, her own sustenance. Lady Wisdom gives of her own bounty. She literally gives of herself. And the results, if you come in and you dine with Lady Wisdom, you leave simplicity. Remaining simple, remaining neutral is not an option. We're both presented the picture of the simple person walking by and accepting wisdom's bounty doesn't stop your walk. She says it changes its direction. Walk in the path of insight. You're not stopping at the house of wisdom and staying there forever. Instead, you're choosing a path. You're continuing to walk in a certain way. Woman Folly also offers food. This is another similarity, but the food is not her own. And so again, we ask, where did she get it from? And it tells us right away it's been stolen. It's not shared, but it's secreted. Woman Folly does not give of herself, but she takes from others to entice more victims. And this shouldn't surprise us. The description of wisdom prior shows industriousness, and the description of folly shows a predator. Somebody waiting by the door, crouching by the door, if you will, like the sin that God told Cain was crouching at his door. And for those who are enticed, their reward is death. My translation reads, the dead are there. The word that is actually used for dead in Hebrew is the Hebrew word Rephaim. And these were the spirits in the Hebrew culture. These were the spirits of the giants who died. The giants back in Noah's days who died. And so the point is clear here. It doesn't matter how strong you think you are, how important do you think you are. If you fool around with Lady Folly, you're not strong enough to escape. So we've seen these two women, and what do we conclude? What is the writer of Proverbs trying to say to us? And I think there's different levels of conclusions you can come to. Just like with the proverb that we looked at before, sometimes it's good to give gifts to get out of trouble. You know, if you're a husband and maybe you've made a mistake, then sometimes flowers are in order, right? It's not a bad thing, I wouldn't say. I wouldn't rely on it. It hasn't worked for me. So that's one conclusion, but you can always draw, the longer you meditate on it, you get closer to the heart of what it's saying. And so with these two women, what are they saying? Are they saying it's wise to work hard? If you work hard, you'll have extra wealth to give away. If you don't work hard, then you'll have to prey off of others. And I think that's very true. It's a true way of reading this. But I don't think the idea of Proverbs is to give us surface advice, but instead to dive deep into our hearts and our natures and to understand what lies there. So let's try again. Are they saying it's wise to be generous and foolish to be stingy and predatorial? And I think we get even closer to the heart of what Proverbs is trying to say here, but I think we can dig even a little bit deeper, and we can say this about wisdom and folly. The outworking of wisdom and folly will show in how we treat others. The flower of wisdom and folly is our action among others. Wisdom works for the betterment of its neighbors. Wisdom works to bring life to those around her. Wisdom seeks to build others up. Folly, when she works, it's harmful to her neighbors. Folly at work brings death, discord, and poverty to those around her. Folly tears down the very world that she stands on. And these two women compose the world that we stand on. And with which one would you rather live? I think when we think of wisdom, we think of making smart business decisions. We think of maybe navigating politics well. And while wisdom can definitely be involved in all of these things, the true heart of wisdom for God, if we live in God's world, is how do we treat one another? That's the true heart of wisdom. And Lady Wisdom works for others, with others. I don't think that's the only thing that chapter 9 wants to tell us, because there's some verses interrupting these two women. These verses kind of stand like a wall between the two women. What's the how do you make the choice between the two? And the center of the passage, or the center of this chapter, tells us. And these verses in between these two women, verses I believe 7 through 12, at first glance they seem like a rude interruption to a nice little story. So let's read them. Verse 7, whoever corrects a scoffer gets himself abuse, and he who reproves a wicked man incurs injury. Do not reprove a scoffer, or he will hate you. Reprove a wise man, and he will love you. Give instruction to a wise man, and he will be wiser still. Teach a righteous man, and he will increase in learning. And this seems to be a sudden change of topic here, but it actually engages you in two ways. I think it's a clever change of pace. It makes you sit up. Okay, I thought we were talking about a woman here. What are we talking about now? And it's also a little bit of psychological goading to wake you up. If you dismiss what's been said so far about Lady Wisdom, if you internally scoff at the description of wisdom, you are the wicked person. You've already made your choice. And you see how the writer catches you in your own thoughts. And maybe even now you realize this and you walk away, or you become angry, and he's proved his point. It's like Paul, he says in one of his letters, any of those who have the Spirit of God should recognize that what I'm saying is true. That's kind of like what he's saying here. Everyone wants to be considered wise, but being wise means accepting correction, a change in your path. So Proverbs has the reader in a trap. To be considered wise, you must accept the truth of these statements, even if they sting a little bit. Even if they call you away from just simply serving yourself. Now that the writer has us trapped, he drops the core statement on us. The core of chapter 9, it's the core of Proverbs, it's the core of wisdom. Verse 10, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is insight. For by me your days will be multiplied, and years will be added to your life. If you are wise for yourself, and if you scoff, you alone will bear it. I think we find verse 10 in various forms throughout the book of Proverbs. It's, like I said, the foundation that wisdom is built upon. You model the God that you love. If it's the God of serving yourself, scorn, vice, your life is going to model it. And you're going to receive the reward that it's its only intrinsic possession, and that's death. And if you love the God of self-giving, self-sacrifice, humility, and wholesomeness, your life will model it. And you will receive the rewards that are intrinsic possession of that God, and that is love, hope, community, joy, peace. In Proverbs 9, verse 10, and the description of the rest of the chapter, I think we hear the echo of Jesus summarizing the law of Moses. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And I think we peer into this mirror that Proverbs 9 offers us, and we can see the reflection of the scriptures all throughout it. Will you choose to listen to God and eat of the abundance of the trees in the garden that he has freely given to you? Or will you choose to be your own God and make yourself the source of right and wrong and accuse your spouse and your surroundings when things don't go right? Will you do the hard work of going in and taking and ordering the land that God has given into your hands to care for? Or will you shrink away in cowardice and laziness, ignoring the heritage of your ancestors and the future of your children for the ease of Egypt? Will you choose to go out and fight the battles that need to be fought, or will you stay at home toying with lust and inviting destruction like David? We consider Adam and Eve and the mistake that they made to be foolish, and we consider Israel's timidity in the desert and trusting God to be foolish. We consider the failure of David as avoidable and foolish. We consider those who refused the wedding feast offered in Jesus' parable as foolish. We consider the Galatians and their infighting over circumcision foolish. And we laugh at the Corinthians who got drunk at their communions and were proud of their sexual freedom. We consider them foolish. And yet each one of these stories presents to us the same parable that Proverbs 9 lays before us. And each one of these stories asks us the same question that Proverbs 9 asks us. Which one are you going to choose? Our lives are the parables that our children are reading. Our lives are the parables that the world is reading. And what are we going to be? Are we going to be a cautionary tale? Or are we going to be the type of soil that yields its wealth and feeds people? Are we going to be the temple where people can meet the living God? Are we going to be a tree of life for people? I imagine Mary and Joseph, they raised their family on the book of Proverbs. Jesus was fond of using parables, and so was his brother James. And the parable I'd like to close with and focus on is the parable of the 4 soils. I think most of us are familiar with it. The sower goes out and sows the seed, and there's 4 soils, and some of them are unfruitful, and one of them is fruitful. And maybe today, maybe you feel like one of those unproductive soils. Maybe you scoff at the idea of Jesus or a God who died so that we might live. Maybe you were once a believer in this loving God, but the difficult times that you're encountering now has caused you to question if his love and his way of living really matters. Maybe you believe, but your life is full of things that you know are bringing death both to you and to those around you. And I want to encourage you, stones can be removed from the soil, and weeds can be pulled up, and even the hardest earth can be made soft by the Spirit of God. And the fact that you guys are here listening means that you can still hear the voice of wisdom. Not me, but what's in here. And the choice is still before you. I think we'll end with that. Do you have a closing song? Yeah? Okay. Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives generously to all, without reproach, and it will be given to him. Lord, I thank you for Niverville. I thank you for their faithfulness to you. Lord, I just pray that you see the need of each heart here. And so, Lord, we know you as a father. We know you as a friend. And so I ask that you would come into our lives this week and provide for us, Lord. And I just pray that you would make Niverville a light in the community so that each person that meets someone here will say, I wonder what they have. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.